Welcome, everyone. My name is Charisse Lakeside. I am the president of Portland CSI, and I'm thrilled to see all of you here joining us tonight. I'm going to take care of a couple quick housekeeping items, and we'll get busy. I'm not super fond of being on a big stage like this, so I'll make it quick. The first thing I would like to do is thank the Portland Building and Closure Council. Building and closure folks, those of you that are in the audience right now, could you stand up, please? I know you guys are in the room, I saw you. They're probably still at the bar. For the first time ever, we paired events today, and we had the Building Enclosure Symposium today. There's one of them, wave for me, thank you. And we paired both events, and we're capping it off tonight with the Portland Industry Forum. It has been a wonderful, collaborative, open and honest experience to partner with their organization for these two big events. If I could encourage anybody in this room in any industry organization to find more ways to do that, the sharing of knowledge and information and coming together at the table is really a great experience. And I thank them for their hospitality to our CSI members today, and I welcome them here tonight. So thank you again. I would also like to thank a few of our sponsors. Our event sponsor tonight, and please give them a round of applause, is Interior Technology. If you could stand up if you're close by when I say your company, if anybody from Interior Technology is in the audience. Our platinum sponsors, please stand. Diamore, Cody. Todd Construction. Thank you. Ideate, Tony. And Bluebeam. A few just really quick words about CSI. A common misconception that I find myself preaching quite regularly is that CSI is a bunch of old gray-haired specifiers. That couldn't be further from the truth, because while I happen to be a specifier, I'm not old, nor am I gray. At least you guys can't tell. CSI is about project delivery education, cradle to grave. And one thing that's very important right now is that our generations are imbalanced. Our baby boomers are leaving, and they're taking all of their knowledge with them. There is not enough of my generation X to fill their spots. We have a huge amount of young professionals, which are a passion for me, coming up the ranks. They're having to come up sooner. And we have some of those young professionals in our audience. I see some of you. We have one that's going to be our next CSI president-elect. We need to help them come up, and CSI is one of the best places that they can get all of this information. Historically, they would not have received in their firms for 10, 15, 20 years into their career. So we are one of the biggest chapters and one of the most vibrant chapters in the country. I invite you to join us. You don't have to join. Come check out some of our meetings. We're doing a lot of great things in CSI. But mainly, I want you to understand we're about a whole lot more than specifications. And I welcome you. Find me, and I'll show you around if you'd like to join us. The last thing is for any CSI members in our audience, we have a Institute Bylaws amendment out. I urge you to please go and vote yes. Whether it fails or passes, it can't do either without 2/3 of the vote. So I just want to remind you, those ballots are in your inbox, and please vote. With that said, I am going to just finish off all the boring stuff and introduce Mr. Alexander Lungershausen. That would be you.
All right. Welcome now to the first part of our program tonight, the 6x10 speakers. We have a really cool lineup today, which as always represents some of our amazing local talent, but also speaks to the variety of participants that the Portland CSI is trying to get into the room here tonight. Our first speaker, Cody, is pursuing a Bachelor of Architecture with a minor in art from the University of Oregon. During his time at school, he has been a teaching assistant introducing students to 3D modeling and parametric design. He has studied in Rome and in Vancouver, BC. In 2014, he won the Royal Society of the Arts Student Design Competition and spent his summer working in New York with Nicholas Grimshaw. He's fueled by the desire to create space with the ability to evolve and adapt, providing beneficial services to people and the environment throughout time. As a native of the Pacific Northwest, he loves to ski, to hike, to camp, what we all like to do. And when he can't leave town fast enough, he loves to be in his backyard. So please help me welcome Cody.
All right. Good afternoon. I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak with you today. The research I'm going to show you is the product of my thesis studio, Repairing the Earth, where we were asked to understand and analyze major large-scale worldwide problems and connect them to particular problems in the urban structure. The purpose is to contribute and help preserve life and beauty on Earth in a way that our children and our children's children will be able to continue enjoying life and beauty for a long time into the future. My vision is to create a center for sustainable consumption that promotes regenerating the landscape, raising awareness of overconsumption. The goal is to provide an alternative reality that people can strive to take part in. Before I jump in, I want to share some of the theory behind my work. My project began with a focus on the problems and challenges posed by climate change in combination with population growth and resource management. I soon realized that these topics cannot be looked at individually, but instead need to be understood as a complex set of interrelated phenomena. By looking at this issue from a systemic perspective, I learned that while climate change and population growth play an important role in resource management, the heart of the problem lies in our consumptive behaviors, mostly our relationship with the world and the way we see trash. Sustainable consumption is a holistic response to the problems posed by our current production methods. It can be defined as the promotion of patterns of consumption and production that reduce environmental stress while meeting the basic needs of humanity. This includes minimizing the use of natural resources, toxic materials, and the emissions of waste and pollutants. Shifting to sustainable consumption involves cradle-to-cradle design, ecologically friendly production techniques, regenerative resource management, and resource recovery. In the words of Buckminster Fuller, it means to increase the performance per pound of the world's resources until they provide all of humanity with a high standard of living. In order for sustainable consumption to be successful, it requires a paradigm shift in the modern worldview. No longer can the earth be regarded as a machine, separated into parts and existing only for our use. This has led to a world plagued by the endless consumption of finite non-renewable resources and the abuse of regenerative systems for short-term gain. Instead, we must work in harmony with the Earth's natural regenerative capabilities, taking care to maintain it as if it was our spaceship. Once we acknowledge the negative effects of our hyper-consumptive behavior, we can begin to realign our economic and social systems with those already present in the world. Philosopher and dark ecologist Timothy Morton describes this contemporary dilemma as a struggle with the hyperobject. Hyperobjects are entities of such vast spatial and temporal dimensions that they defeat traditional ideas of what a thing is. This places them outside our realm of here and now and makes them more difficult to understand. In this case, trash is a hyperobject. It is non-local and atemporal, meaning that trash has the ability to transcend time and space. Plastic is just one example. As shown here, the effects of plastic can be traced across a multitude of systems, from the watershed it was created, to the human who used and discarded it, to the ecosystem that is inevitably left to deal with it. This is the result of production and consumption methods that are disconnected from the world. They remain disconnected because they do not take into account the irreversible damage they are causing to humans and the environment. We have reached the point in time where the effects of past methods we are no longer able to ignore. Architecture that embodies the principles of sustainable consumption can begin to regenerate our relationship with the world by acting as a mediator between ourselves and the environment. Natural systems serve as an excellent model for sustainable consumption. One of the biggest differences between human resource management and natural resource management revolves around waste. In the natural world, there is no such thing as waste. Organisms like the honey fungus pictured here reappropriate waste into valuable new purposes. In the human world, waste is discarded and left as a problem for future generations. Shifting to a society based on the principles of sustainable consumption requires understanding that our cities also function much like an organism, taking nutrients and materials in, processing them, and outputting waste. My proposal looks specifically at resource management in Portland, Oregon, and the surrounding metro area. Portland has a reputation for being a green city, yet it still functions as part of a mass consumer society. Portland may have the highest recycling rate in the country, yet it still produces over 1 million tons of garbage a year. That's enough to fill 2,500 Olympic swimming pools. Just for scale, this graphic shows the relative volume of trash sent to landfills by the Portland metro area since 1970, where the size of the circle corresponds to the amount of trash in the landfill, and the distance of the circles from the center corresponds to how far the landfill is from Portland city center. Pink landfills are closed and no longer accepting waste, while blue landfills are open and currently accepting waste. As I click through these slides, it becomes apparent that the situation is fast growing out of control. Not only are the current landfills exponentially larger, but they are farther and farther away. Portland currently sends most of its trash 140 miles east to Arlington in the Columbia Gorge. This increased distancing not only increases more environmental degradation due to transportation, it also encourages people to continue consuming more because they are not faced with the effects of their trash. The population of Portland is expected to double by 2035, which provides a window of only 20 years to plan and prepare a waste management infrastructure to handle double the amount of trash. This could be addressed by simply increasing the capacity of landfills, but that does not help reduce the amount of trash we generate. So I took this as an incentive to develop a materials recovery facility that not only reduces the amount of waste sent to landfills, but educates people on the effects of our hyperconsumptive behavior by supporting research in earth-friendly materials and production methods. Because of this multi-purpose program designed to reinitiate a dialogue between people and the environment, the project is more than a materials recovery facility. It becomes a center for sustainable consumption. The center is sited in the Northwest Industrial District of downtown Portland, just south of the St. John's Bridge. Here, the land has a rich history and shares a telling story of our relationship with nature in terms of consumption and production. Before World War II, the Northwest Industrial District was made up of small lakes surrounded by low-lying marshy wetlands. The original inhabitants often avoided the area because of its soft ground and frequent flooding, but as soon as Eastern settlers arrived and saw the need for more buildable land, the streams and wetlands were filled and the river was dredged and hardlined. Since World War II, the Northwest Industrial District has been the primary site for chemical processing, petroleum storage, and other heavy industries. The site currently stores over 90% of fossil fuel for the state of Oregon. These industries have left a legacy of toxic contamination, and the area is now classified as a top priority cleanup site. Locating the center in a contaminated site gives people the opportunity to experience trash as a hyperobject by witnessing the negative effects of past and current production methods. However, it also provides the opportunity for people to experience the healing effects of an architecture coupled with biological processes. My vision is to change the way we see waste through an architecture that acts as the city's digestive system, processing materials for reuse and redistribution. In a typical recycling center, the recovery process is difficult to follow, but by unraveling and extending it, the process becomes much easier to understand without the need for complicated descriptions and signage. This allows for a more informative experience and evokes feeling on a human-to-human level by putting visitors in direct contact with the people working there. As people arrive, they follow the simplified recycling process, which shows the benefits of material recovery by superimposing trash on the landscape. As I am in the process of designing, this is one conceptual understanding of how a center for sustainable consumption could be realized. Here, the architecture itself celebrates and makes attractive the process of waste management. It creates an atmosphere that people are excited to work in and want to visit. Historically, infrastructure projects were celebrated because people valued the importance of their purpose. It is time once again that critical infrastructure projects are given the importance they deserve. The center brings industry, people, and nature together under one roof, allowing for the emergence of a totally new experience driven by the need to incorporate waste into everyday life. In order to promote sustainable consumption, architecture must act as the facilitating mesh between these currently disparate ecological, economic, and social systems. As one of the biggest resource sinks, architecture and related industries have the opportunity to make a significant impact. How can we shift to a society that values waste and promotes sustainable consumption if the very fabric we inhabit continues to ignore the effects of our hyper-consumptive behaviors? Thank you.
Thank you, Cody. That was really awesome. And Cody is looking for work right now, so if anybody has a job, this is a really good chance to talk to him and meet him, but I think he's done a very good job at introducing himself here. Travis is an assistant professor in ecological design at Portland University School of Architecture. Here he teaches lecture courses, design studios, and design build courses. His primary interest grounds a research, teaching, and design agenda focused on appropriate material choice, the prioritization of authentic craftsmanship, passive systems design, adapted historical technology, critical regionalism, and temporal architectural solutions. Travis' affection for architecture and teaching is rooted in the process of making. Following his undergraduate degree in philosophy, Travis spent many years working as a carpenter, marveling at the methods and techniques utilized to bring architectural drawings into material reality. These experiences have informed a design philosophy that emphasizes the craft of making and building, not simply as the orchestrated outcome of design, but as the generative processes that enrich the design of meaningful architecture. Please help me welcome my friend Travis.
Thank you, Alexander, and thank you all. In preparing this presentation, I began with the belief that I was speaking with you here today largely based on nostalgia from my friend Alexander. Nostalgia for a seemingly outmoded, antiquated process I'll be referring to as making, and its relationship to architecture. I now believe that Alexander asked me to speak not simply due to nostalgia, but as an attempt to recover or remember a critical part of what we have always done as architects, indeed as human beings, prior to our current mechanized conception of making. For a number of years now, Alexander has been gracious enough to volunteer his time as a reviewer of my students' work at Portland State University School of Architecture. In this role, Alexander has listened, questioned, and offered insights to young architecture students as they work through the very, very difficult process of developing an ability to transfigure concepts into material reality. And I do mean absolutely to suggest that this is a sort of magical process, a reading of patterns and signs, a fundamental use of that special gift of imagination. Of particular interest to Alexander was the initial making exercises that I assigned to my students at the beginning of their studio projects, something that reminded him of his own architectural education in Europe. He asked me to describe these and their role that they play in teaching architecture. I've been categorizing this collection of making exercises under the title, The Poetic Container. The general theme of the Poetic Container exercise is to ask students to formalize a conceptual idea within a fairly limited set of material conditions. The initial conceptual ideas are limitless. natural phenomena, social patterns, philosophical inquiries, all are equally meaningful ways to start. In each case, the making exercise is to transform a given concept into a physical container to hold the conceptual idea, or alternatively, to work within a given container to create a material embodiment of the concept. Both iterations operate within very limited boundaries. These exercises are always used as a starting point from which we might begin to see architecture emerge. At the heart of this idea is the notion that making is the critical step from concept to architecture. Concepts are most clearly articulated through language and words. When we want to describe the experience of wonder, for instance, we will likely turn to words, as only words seem capable of conveying the complexity and specificity of the experience. Art, however, offers us another way to convey the experience of being human, one that replaces conceptual clarity with sensual engagement or embodiment. Architecture, as a fully embodied experience, is always communicating with us, but the concepts are far less articulate, being constructed entirely from perceptual experience. Making is translated from concepts to embodied experiences. The poetic containers are an attempt to make this translation happen early in the process for my students, so that the bulk of their design work is embedded in the language of perception. These first set of images are going to come from an exercise entitled Home Economy, in which students were asked to explore a specific, self-chosen form of domestic activity and its economic ramifications. This making exercise was the first assignment for a studio project that would ultimately result in a proposal for low-income multifamily live-work housing. So pretty practical when it comes right down to it. Initial conceptual ideas were given relatively free rein, but each idea needed to be made into an artifact contained within a suitcase or similar container. This project from a student whose name is Sarah Yu was looking into the idea of home entertainment, specifically the role of music as collective family experience, and how so much of our entertainment is now purchased as opposed to created pleasurably, free of charge. This is another form of making that Sarah explored in the studio project, a reference cabinet to hold all of the ideas generated throughout her design process. The ultimate goal for her studio project would become the prioritization of collective gathering space for a variety of types of social interaction within mid-density urban housing. These are complex concepts that are difficult to fully articulate as architecture: form, material, space, and structure. So the question is where to begin for my students. And the idea is that the poetic container is the place to begin transfiguring a concept into a material proposition. It is an imperfect process to do this, but it must begin somewhere, and a conceptually rich translation is an appealing place to start. Another recent example of this sort of poetic container exercise was used in a design studio focused on the conceptual relationship between craftsmanship and architecture. In this case, students were asked to research a traditional craft, its methods, tools, and processes, and to determine the key tool utilized in the craft. They were then asked to make a container for this tool that would celebrate its particular qualities. Here we're looking at work by another student, Katie Barrymore McCullum, and what she's exploring here is the craft of bookmaking. Specifically, her container is exploring the processes and tools of binding. Ultimately, what she put together was something known as a book-binding loom. The eventual studio project would become a community workshop space for the community of Linton, a project we would affectionately call the Linton Toolbox. This building was meant to create opportunities for local craftsmen to teach shop-related skills to high school students interested in working with their hands but lacking adequate educational opportunities in public high school. So these making projects become architecture pretty rapidly. This is another project from this same studio by Matthew Rusnac, who you will very shortly have the pleasure of listening to. Matthew is exploring the craft of boat building and focused his attention on the block plane as the key tool of the craft. Similarly to the complex questions surrounding the relationship between home economy and meaningful domestic architecture, the relationships between craftsmanship, making, local economies, and architecture are almost hopelessly complex to imagine articulating in the language of form, materials, structure, and enclosure. How do you formulate architecture from these conceptual ideas? This is what my students want to know. I think it's what many of us still struggle with. The limiting boundaries of these sorts of making projects seem to offer students a way to move more fluidly from concept to material intervention. A final example of the poetic container exercise comes from a studio I have co-taught with Professor Rudy Barton. For this studio, students were eventually tasked with designing a weather research facility. Weather is one of the most straightforward patterns architects can design for. There are loads of well-documented methods and rules to make buildings work well within their given climate. Digital design tools now permit a truly impressive array of ways to have building form dictated by natural patterns. But even here, at the beginning, the initial imperfect transformation of an idea, the process of embodying concepts is difficult without imposing limitations. To facilitate this process, we ask students to make a weather box to explore how they might transform natural patterns into material propositions. In each project, students had to contain their chosen weather phenomenon within a found cigar box. Wind, fog, sun, precipitation. These explorations in making offered more than pure performative understanding of weather. They allowed a large degree of perceptual content to enter the conversation early on. So needless to say, I claim no ownership over this method of exploring architecture, as fun as it has been for me and for, I think, our reviewers. I owe this mostly to my mentors, Clive Knights and Rudy Barton, who were able to pass along this idea of making as being such an important part of the beginning of the process. So this approach is not entirely novel. Many architects likely employ some form of artifact making in the conceptual stages of design. Even so, I would like to suggest that it is perhaps a diminished process in our profession today, which works so adamantly within the mechanistic problem-solution conception of architecture. This sort of conception is good at solving industrial problems with industrial solutions, but leaves little room to offer ideas about meaning within the human predicament. Making offers exploration of unspoken, undecipherable perceptions and emotions in human life, something design alone cannot achieve. Many of the most important human experiences have no direct material architectural solutions, only embodied implications.
Thank you, Travis. I just love your approach, and I think you're bringing something really wonderful and special to architectural education. I met our next speaker, Josh Partee, about a year ago, and as the grandson of a photographer myself, I was immediately drawn to his well-crafted images. Formerly trained as an architect, his love for the building process and architecture have kept him working alongside designers, making sure their projects look their best in print and on screen. He understands that he is responsible for how most of the world will experience their work, and believes photo documentation to be an inextricable final step for any build project. Architectural photography has taken Josh to all corners of the USA. He has about 150 different clients just here in the Portland region, and when not working, his love for travel has brought him all over the world to photograph culture, public art, and architecture. On a side note, but a very important one, he and his wife are also expecting their first child, and any minute now, actually. And so before he runs off, here's Josh, and I'm really glad that he can be here today.
All right, thank you all for coming. I noticed it's after 5 o'clock, so I found the bartender. Thank you, Alexander. Again, I'm Josh Partee, one of your local architectural photographers. Let me test this. Okay. Again, my background is in architecture. I loved it, and I love photographing buildings for the same reasons. I love problem solving, and practicing both is about solving problems using art and science. And it's so rewarding when the aesthetic and technical considerations are resolved into a compelling image. And I love architectural photography so much. I don't know how I'm going to compress it into words and into 9.5 minutes, but I will try using this appropriately image-heavy slideshow. Today I'd like to describe the process and different parts of documenting a built work, with a side note on the use of people in photos. First, a quick disclaimer. This is all just my opinion, a theory, just a distillation of a workflow evolved these last 8 years of my practice. I didn't go to school for this. I actually went to school where Cody went to school, at U of O. I was in Jim Pettinari's studio, where Hio Nice was. There he is, good-looking guy. There really isn't a school for specifically this, so you've been warned. Okay, let's first consider this. Photos are how most of the world will experience your projects. It's a small percentage of people that will actually visit versus those that will be literally judging your project's, your building's success based on a handful of images, likely online. Which means we need to put together a tight, complete image set. And typically, we only devote 4 to 8 hours to shooting a built project, a building, whatever your scope is. So there are a lot of very quick decisions to be made. With that in mind, these are the questions that clients and I consider before each shoot, and I've been forgetting to click away here. Let me get to those questions while you quickly absorb some imagery. And I encourage you to keep your eyes on the screen and not me. It'll be more interesting. Don't worry, we've allowed time for these pauses. So, again, the questions the clients and I consider before each shoot: what was your scope? And more importantly, what is the story? And secondly, what parts are you proud of and what's unique? So, scope. Where does your work begin and end so we can focus on that and nothing else? And the story, was it a TI, new construction, just the cabinetry? Were there siding considerations, challenges, problems that were solved creatively? What's the DNA of this job? What's the story you want to tell? And those answers sort of inform your roadmap of how to get the images we need. So again, here's that sort of roadmap. And as we start looking at photos, I'd like you to notice the staging, specifically the staging of people in the photos. I'm going to circle back to this, but I'd like you to also notice how your eye moves through each image and how people affect those movements. I don't really like putting these photos in boxes, but for the sake of discussion, I've tried to define the different types that are specific to telling building stories. So we'll start with hero shots. I think we're all most familiar with these. Hero shots, these are the magazine covers. They're the internet clickbait in an email from Dwell. They're the big photo on your award submission board every year at the AIA. These are very important, but they can't stand alone. Here's a few. They're the big, obvious, overall corner shots, entry elevations at dusk. Very fun images to make. Again, it's hard for me to click and talk, so we'll have a nice, fun pause. While we're on this image, I'm not going to talk a lot about the finer points of image editing, because that could be more than a 10-minute presentation on its own. And it's been in the news recently, the ethics and honesty of photo editing, but I'll just quickly say this. Editing is a small part of architectural photography. It really shouldn't be more than 10%, and we'll come back to that. But here's a great example of some things that just speak to removing distractions. I don't think this is being dishonest, but very common in Portland are above-ground power lines. So we do stuff like this and remove them. It's not really anything the designer could have done anything about, but that's the sort of things that are keeping me honest. Okay, so those are hero images. We're all familiar with what those are. Now, I'd like to break the supporting images into 3 groups. First, vignettes. Okay, vignettes, these are just single pieces of the building program, but whole parts, whole moments. These often work best with people in them. Schools have so many different kinds of parts, programmatic pieces to experience. We'll see some of those here, a theater, classroom. I mean, one of these images does not the story of a school tell. I mean, you have to have all of these. This is a research basement room at the U of O. Those are zebrafish. Laboratory classroom. A yoga studio at Western Oregon University. This is Banks Middle School. Again. See how people play an important role in telling the story in each of these shots. And how they lead your eye through the shot. If these people weren't in the image, your experience of this space, based on the image, would be very different. And the scope of these small shots is entirely relative to your scope. For a bedroom remodel, it's as small as a styled dresser top. For a whole new house, a vignette could be just a shot of the kitchen in use, as we see here. For a cafe, just a nice moment at one cafe table, or a nice part of the entry sequence. More vignette shots, just little slices of what that project's about. Next, story shots. Story shots, I like to say these tell a little story, hence the name. I feel like they are 2 or 3 layered vignette shots. So we saw vignette shots, the last 20 frames, they're kind of one piece of the story. Story shots, you have more than one piece of the story, which is kind of what a whole story is about. We can see how different pieces relate in these shots. We see how the building engages the site, its context. And maybe your scope is just the construction of the project or the concrete work. We'll see some shots of construction in a moment. But here, this shot of a cafe that Henneberry Eddy did in Southwest. It used to be a bus stop. And, I mean, that's part of the story, but also part of it is its, relationship to transit and downtown and its context in the site. So this is a library in Lebanon. That's my lovely girlfriend, pregnant, who's sitting showing its relationship to the site, and that it has a beautiful site and a nice context. Here's a picture of Montbell. It's a retail space and how it's activated by its adjacency to some multimodal transit, including the MAX. And then just for versatility, sometimes I'll process images in two ways, so they don't necessarily have to include the MAX in those shots. Again, if your scope isn't the whole building, maybe you just did the concrete, then the photos that we're going to take are going to be very different. This is your story. You know, it's the process, it's the people involved, it's what makes this all happen. And there are artful ways to document the nitty-gritty. Some spaces like this one are very dynamic. These days we're trying to get the most bang for our buck, and we're designing spaces with movable walls that can really transform. Here's one, walls open. Again, kind of a layered shot. Okay. Next, we're going to talk about documents. While maybe not as sexy as vignettes or story shots, documents are mostly straightforward. They're details. They're just clean, whole room shots. These are less about storytelling, and you'll notice the lack of people. They can be simply striking compositions, etc. Basically, they're cool parts. They're nice moments that didn't make it into our other shots, but they really round out the image set and need to be in our portfolios. So this is just a nice moment. It doesn't even really tell you anything about the building, but it's a graphic that lends itself to describing the character of the space. This is a detail of an art installation at OSU. Again, it can just be a clean, whole room shot. It's very descriptive. It's a good document. Little details, photos of different scales. They're the ones that fill in the gaps for this whole story. Again, nice material details. Really hard to get a sexy picture of a bioswale. So we've got some good context here. We had some volunteers after hours that we talked into jogging around the track on what looks like an 80-degree day with the school in the background. Again, the track was part of the scope for this school. This is Park Rose Middle School. Skylights. This is a nice one, nice materiality. Detail, some CNC detailing on a table at a fire station. This is actually the lighting up underneath an awning that Henneberry Eddie did at the Cedar Hills Ivy Club. A little detail, TriMet parking garage. Just a small bench in an office. I mean, very important images, documents. Okay, now that we've quickly broken down the parts of an image set, I'd like to dissect an individual image. I think I quickly mentioned earlier that I don't consider editing or post-processing to be a significant part of what makes an image successful. Again, I'd say maybe 10%, but any professional quality image really does need some balancing of light and color. And it also needs some general cleanup. It needs fixing of construction defects, tidying cords in the image, removing sprinkler heads, flash strobes, power lines. I have 1 minute left. I'm going to hurry up. The other three parts, which I consider to be more or less equal, are composition, lighting, and staging. I think we all generally know what composition means. It's kind of the 1,000 quick decisions in a few moments before we drop the shutter. We could talk about this forever. Lighting. Lighting is mostly shooting when conditions are right. Time of year, time of day, sun angle, weather, all very important for exterior and interior shots with windows and skylights. Staging. Photos clutter quickly, so clean spaces are crucial. So that's mostly subtractive. As far as additive staging, there are stylists that do just this full time. For building photos, I want to circle back to people. People are our most powerful staging elements. I want to underline that. Historically, there was a trend towards vacant, empty architectural imagery for a number of reasons. Part of that trend was clean graphic images, but mostly it was because of clothes and cars. Clothing and cars date photos. Photography is a significant marketing investment, so we'd like to be able to use these images for 20 plus years, but shoulder pads, big hair, teal-colored boxy cars make that very difficult. However, today I'd argue that we need people in our building photos for a few reasons. Obvious reason being, it activates a space, gives scale, informs how it's used, and makes a space feel loved. Isn't that a sexy picture? How big is that building? Oh. So, but where we stage people in our photos is what's critical. People should generally be in the middle ground and background. People in the foreground turn photos into lifestyle shots, where the building becomes sort of a set dressing. People in the foreground also have faces that we can read, which can be very distracting, which doesn't help us. So here's my laser. So if these people were standing here, their faces would be this big, and that's where our eyes would go. Over here, you notice they're a little blurred, a little obscured. We're just understanding them as participants in the scene with the architecture. Now we understand how big this is, because in this particular photo, we don't have any chairs, doors to give us scale. Okay, earlier I'd asked you to notice the people in the photos and how they affected how your eye moved through the image. Our eyes flicker around an image. Did I say that right? Flicker? Flicker around an image. The path they follow is based on what scientists are calling saccadic movements. And in the most basic of terms, we know that when presented with a scene, we first look for faces or people. Then we look to the darkest area. Then we look to the area of most complexity. Then back to the face or person in loops. So I like to kind of distill that as friend, danger, what's that? So face, dark, complex. I think I have a better example of that, but I think you understand what I mean, and maybe you've noticed throughout the presentation. So here's a few photos with and without people. And I find this so interesting because two of these things are present already in architecture, darker areas and complex areas. Darker areas being corners of a shot, underneath furniture, more complex areas being truss work up towards the ceiling, not necessarily where our eye needs to linger. And having two foci, the two that already exist in architecture, is not enough to comfortably lead an eye through an image and across our work. But by using people strategically placed, we can create triangles and loops for our eyes to circulate, reducing the time and effort needed to visually digest information. And with our attention spans more limited, efficiency is very important. And speaking of efficiency, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And thank you for taking the time in what this must be a very, very busy time in your life. In elementary school, Matthew was asked to predict his future. He was 10 years old, and he said he would be an architect, he would own a truck, and he would live until he was 99. He got the architect thing under control. I think he's working on his truck, and we all wish him the best to make it to 99. He graduated from Wilsonville High in 2007, attended PSU shortly afterward, and graduated with a Bachelor of Arts in 2012. After 2 years at Holst, He began a Master of Architecture program at PSU, and he will be defending his thesis next week. He's also a student fellow with the Center for Public Interest Design, where he has worked on various projects that have taught him how to design inclusively. Please help me welcome Matthew.
Thank you, Alexander. So the title of my thesis project is Dwelling in Wanderlust, Architecture as a Vessel for Human Stories. The question that I've been asking myself is, how can story-driven architecture, confident in the cosmos, fortify a person's sense of humanity, identity, and community in an objectifying, disorienting, and isolating age? The journey towards this topic began with reading through Martin Heidegger's Building-Dwelling Thinking. In a concluding paragraph, he states profoundly, "The proper dwelling plight lies in this, that mortals ever search anew for the essence of dwelling, that they must ever learn to dwell." Heidegger's thoughts on the idea of a constant learning or process caught my attention and led me to look to time-based art such as film, literature, and storytelling. I believe such art expresses ideas in bits and pieces and is only understood once the story is complete. John Hayduke's masks, I believe, are an example that bridges the gap between architecture and storytelling. His work is like an adventure story that can be wandered through at one's own pace and slowly come to an understanding of the story being conveyed. One must trust the story, even though at times it may not make sense. I believe life is the same way. We as humans are ever growing, adapting, and changing. And there are events in life that we don't understand in the moment, but later on, often the meaning is revealed to us. So with Heidegger and Hayduke as inspiration, I began to explore how architecture, something often quite permanent, can be designed in such a way that acknowledges our temporal nature. So to move forward, I began to explore the idea of human archetypes, or characters that embody the fundamental patterns of human behavior. Psychologist Dr. Carol Pearson has developed a set of archetypes that have a narrative, poetic quality and come with telling names. There are 6 of them: the innocent, the orphan, the wanderer, the warrior, the altruist, and the magician. I decided to adopt these 6 archetypes as a foundation for further exploration. I believe they offer insight as to how we can design according to human story and character. So with the adoption of the archetypes, the eventual design of a home began to emerge in my mind. I began first by exploring the character through diagrams, and then subsequently through these framed assemblages that I've been calling portraits. The diagrams take Heidegger's notion of the fourfold, the earth, sky, mortals, and divinities, and illustrate how each archetype views each component as though they are being interviewed. The diagrams also show an order of priorities and highlight the most significant component of the fourfold in respect to each archetype. The portraits on the left are sculptural explorations in material, texture, smell, color, symbols, and also form and how they relate to each archetype. This first one is the innocent. It's a character who's marked by optimism, but at the same time can be seen as naive and self-centered. A mature innocent is someone who has experienced a tragedy, a betrayal, or loss, but has resolved to stay hopeful. The orphan is an innocent who has experienced a fortunate fall or a tragedy that disillusions them and kind of destroys their optimistic views of the world. Through the experience, the orphan learns empathy, realism, and how to live with the balance of wariness and hope. The wanderer is someone who realizes that he or she is suffering in their current situation and needs things to change. So that individual will take leave of that situation, whether it's a job that they've been at for a while or a young adult leaving home for the first time. The Wanderer archetype is about exploration in an effort to find one's true identity. The Warrior archetype is about learning to stand one's ground. Once we learn who we truly are, we must fight to maintain those values. Often cultural trends conflict with personal values, and when that conflict arises, the warrior is one who defends them. The mature warrior is someone who also understands that the battle is not dualistic, that a hero, victim, and villain scheme is just an illusion, and there are deeper, more transcendent issues at the core that must be fought. The altruist is about learning how to be truly generous. There are shadow forms of generosity which show themselves, for example, in individuals who use their own sacrifice as a way to manipulate others to get what they want. The altruist teaches us selflessness and what it means to give and keep the big picture in mind. The sixth and last archetype is the magician. The magician is someone who has learned the ability to transform situations, or really anything for that matter, for the better. It is someone who has discovered a purpose for their life and begins to stick with it. And as a result, fortunate coincidences begin to take place, and a path, so to speak, reveals itself to them. It's someone who understands that their life and their decisions can make a difference in the world, and so they choose to live intentionally. Following the diagrams and portraits, I began to explore how the archetypes could drive spatial experience through watercolor renderings and three-dimensional plaster carvings. These were early studies for the House of the Innocent, exploring a space that is inward, spiral-like, and upward focused. These were for the House of the Orphan, exploring the idea of protection and diffused light. After that, I continued to push the watercolor renderings of spaces and also began to add narrative fragments, kind of alluding to the characters behind the image. This first set is inspired by The Orphan and continues to explore ideas of denial, acceptance, and also protection. This set is inspired by The Wanderer and illustrates notions of movement, exploration, and nostalgia. This third set is based on The Altruist and explores ideas of the hearth, gathering, and reconciliation. I also wanted to look at how each archetype might engage in mundane activities. For example, I looked at how each would sleep. The innocent's bedroom is characterized by a nest-like loft that is light and airy, yet protected. The orphan sleeps in a den-like bedroom where he or she can feel safe, and the wanderer sleeps in an open space with apertures that open up to the night sky and to the city. The warrior's sleeping space is centered in his home, protected and kept warm by a glowing fire. The altruist sleeps in a space at the center of the community where she can see each of the 6 homes. And the magician bedroom faces east in a hopeful awaiting of the sun and is open to the home's central spiral staircase. While I was in the process of generating those watercolor renderings of the individual homes and individual spaces, I thought it was also really important to start addressing ideas of community and relationship, kind of at the same time. So I first began by simply placing the characters side by side on an imaginary street as if they were townhomes. I then decided to test the characters on the constraints of a real site. I selected an empty lot in Southeast Portland on Division and 23rd. For the design of the housing complex, I began with the character and moved outwards. Each home influenced another and pushed and pulled the other as they grew into their current forms. The wanderer sits at the front corner as a linear, elevated space. The magician's home is tower-like, focusing on the vertical dimension. The innocence is a nest-like home that is light and fragile, and is resting on top of the altruist and dependent on it. The altruist is at the center and is somewhat formless as it fills the gaps between the other homes. The warrior's house is 2-part. One is long and thin, representing action and forcing its way between the other homes, and the other is cube-shaped, representing protection and respectful assimilation. The orphan's home is set at the back and is protected by the warrior. It is also made of stone and concrete and is characterized by the fissure that splits the home's functions. So I believe we're all writing unique stories for our lives. I think humanity is diverse. However, the archetypes and stories help us to understand what we have in common. We all share similar struggles and successes. By melding such stories with the craft of architecture, I believe one can arrive at an architecture that offers clues and wisdom as to what it means to be a human, and thus play an active and dynamic role in the lives of people. Such architecture recognizes human diversity and the diversity of individual story, and can thus affirm a sense of humanity, identity, and community, which is needed in an age that disorients, objectifies, and isolates. The 6 homes are meant to question typical design standards of contemporary urban housing and suggest a way of designing that is rooted in the diversity and timelessness of human character and relationship. Alberto Perez Gomez states, "True architecture responds to a desire for an eloquent place to dwell, one that lovingly provides a sense of order, resonant with our dreams, a gift contributing to our self-understanding as humans inhabiting a mortal world." And I want to ask, as designers, are we considering the unique stories of individuals and the relationships they share? Thank you.
Yeah, that was beautiful, Matthew. Thank you so much. I want to do a quick shout out to our videographer, Frank. He's back there in the middle. He has his own YouTube channel, his own workshop. He's amazing. If you want to talk to Frank, meet him, please, afterwards. Over the years, putting this group together, I've always dreamed of finding a maker who is active in fabricating things for our amazing bike community here in Portland. Our next speaker, Shawn, does that and much, much more. He originally hails from Wisconsin, farm country, where he learned to fabricate tools and contraptions ever since he was tall enough to milk a cow. He built just about everything you can think of, from robots to wind turbines, rockets to hovercrafts. Shawn is best known there for taking hot dogs to the limits of the earth and back. After earning a mechanical degree, he moved to Portland 8 years ago to start Ruckus Composites. I hope I'm saying that right, but he is driven to shake things up in the world through engineering and to inspire others to further innovate and create. Please help me welcome Shawn. This is the advancer.
Okay, perfect. All right. I've intentionally and unintentionally broken more things in my life than I like to even remember or talk about. But I was raised to always try and fix things first before we ever replaced them. Everyone knows the ancient wise farmer proverb of, "When the sun shines, make hay." But what they don't tell you is that the tractor is always going to break down first, or if that doesn't, something else surely will. Or most often, unpredictable accidents can happen. For example, one time my grandpa was filling up one of our tractors with diesel fuel and the parking brake failed. The tractor rolled all the way down the hill into the pond in our front yard, flipped upside down, filled the entire fuel tank with scummy pond water. So that day, I learned the value of siphoning and cleaning a fuel line. Another time, my brother crashed a tractor which broke a hay wagon, took out 100 yards of barbed wire fencing, and took out 100 yards of fencing. So that day, I learned how to fix a fence and re-weld a new wagon axle. None of these could have been predicted, but it all had to be fixed immediately. Rural environments are cultures of repair for a number of reasons. You never have the right tools, money's always tight, rarely is anyone around that has any technical training, and you don't have time to drive half a day away to get anything fixed. Or most likely you're stuck in the middle of a field. We always had to fix all of our machinery on site with what we had available. Growing up in this repair-centric environment gave me a strong mechanical aptitude and a foundation for me to become one thing: a mechanical engineer. I love designing, making, destroying, repairing, and fixing machines.
2, 1.
So what higher? This is a quick video.
Wow, we totally got back for it.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So, Through college, I took my repair attitude into many of my high-altitude rocket competitions. That was one example of a situation that didn't go as planned, and we broke everything. We learned a lot about making our own explosion powders this way. But through all these trials, failures, and minor explosions, we ended up winning a prize and presented our autonomous parachute guidance recovery system to the NASA engineers at the Jet Propulsion Laboratories. Post-college, I decided to take my assortment of mechanical skills, engineering degree, and a love of bikes to the next level. I started Ruckus Composites with an honest desire to change the world and shake things up through engineering, art, conservation, and science. We are dedicated to setting a standard on safe carbon fiber repair for the bicycle industry. Bikes are getting impressively complicated nowadays. Higher gear counts, electronic shifting, smarter integrations, power data, heart rate monitors, and very complicated material sciences. And we have seen it all. We've seen bike damages of all different types imaginable and often unimaginable, ranging from bear attacks, forest fires, angry spouses, angry ex-spouses, racing crashes, and myriad manufacturing defects. And the classic excuse of, I don't know what happened, I was just riding along. So how do we safely fix such complicated things? Science and engineering, of course. As the bicycle frame materials get more complicated, so do our carbon fiber repair strategies. Repairing carbon fiber requires an intimate knowledge of procedures, material science, bike science, engineering, and my favorite of all, documentation and data. Here's an example of one of our more extreme repairs. A gentleman had just finished a long bike ride and was very hungry and very focused on getting a cheeseburger from a drive-through window. But he forgot his bike was on top of his car and drove it straight into the drive-through window. So to safely repair this, we needed to cut off the entire head tube of the bike and to make sure that all the damage was removed. Once all the damage was removed, we had to fabricate new carbon fiber tubes, jig them in place, and then form them with new carbon fiber with heat and pressure molding back onto the original frame. Once we were finished with the structural work, we have a full paint shop to repaint and fully restore the damaged area. This repaired frame turned out looking great and now has thousands of miles back on it and thousands of miles more to go. Over time, my interest into repair deepened, and I began to study the history of art of kintsugi. One of the most interesting topics I found. Kintsugi is a philosophy that treats breakage and repair as part of the history of that object, rather than something to disguise. It does this by infusing gold dust into a lacquer or glue to that damaged area. There was a period in time when kintsugi was so highly sought after that people would go buy something new, smash it, just so they could glue it back together. This makes these objects truly unique and one of a kind. And it translates literally to gold joinery. At Ruckus, we infuse the ideas of engineering and beauty into our daily practices of carbon fiber repair. So far, we have saved 3,939 frames from the landfills, and we're just getting started. We have a story of a flawless service record, and it's spreading quick. This year alone, we're on track to repair over 2,000 damaged bike frames. A number of different corporations are adding repair to their service portfolios. Here's a few examples of my favorites. Surprisingly, FedEx. FedEx runs the FedEx Tech Connect Center, and they employ 3,000 people out at Memphis to repair as many consumer electronics as you could ever imagine. It's a huge facility. DeWalt designs their tools to be readily repaired by either a home or user or an authorized repair center, and they make spare parts and schematics openly available on the internet. And here's my favorite story from Patagonia. They created a powerful ad campaign this last summer based around the adventures you create with your clothes and the damages they incur. They employ 45 people in the Reno facility to repair their products, often for free. Last summer, they went on a nationwide repair tour fixing products out of the back of a truck. And here's that quick other little video. Oh. You can't hear the audio, but he's talking about, and they will cut it there. Oh, perfect. So what he was talking about in that video, it's like when you're using an object, you don't want to think about preserving it. He was climbing and he wanted to jam his shoulder into that rock crevice just so he could get up a little higher. So what is the future of repair as an industry? Things are becoming harder to fix, more embedded, irreplaceable batteries, but the internet is providing a powerful resource to show us as many how-to videos, worthless internet forums, schematics, and find a ton of spare parts all over Amazon or eBay. At Ruckus, fixing your favorite bike is about keeping your bike out of the trash, but it's also about not throwing away the memories of your favorite downhills, your fastest uphill time, or just beating your buddies to the county sign. Repair is a commitment and opportunity to learning how something works. I want to end with a quote from my favorite repair character. If the women don't find you handsome, they should at least find you handy. Thank you.
That was great. Thank you so much, Shawn. Our last 6x10 speaker, Jean-Pierre, is a Portland-based artist, designer, and developer with 23 years of experience in the Portland market. Trained locally as a sculptor, he takes a spatially informed, socially conscious, thoughtful approach to projects from tiny retail concepts to ground-up eco-developments. His firm Siteworks Design Build integrates his background in site-specific art and real-world constructability to focus on the intimacy that can be created between people and their environments. As a developer, Jean-Pierre has a track record of innovative projects that weave into the fabric of their surroundings while coming packed with the possibility of change. He has executed the first net zero pilot apartment in the country, Portland's first food hall, and Oregon's own mid-century auto museum. It is Jean-Pierre's goal to continue to create buildings in Portland that energize neighborhoods and the community at large. Please help me welcome our last speaker, Jean-Pierre.
Someone just shoot at me? Well, thank you everybody for coming. I appreciate the opportunity to share what we do at Siteworks. It's not just me there. I'm armed with a really active and energetic group of architects and builders and fabricators. I mean, a really awesome team. So this is all what we do. We do all the architecture, the fabrication, the development, and the construction for our projects. And I'm excited to share some of these with you. So one of the issues we wanted to kind of talk about today was just how Portland's growing specifically, and we have this migration to Portland, and what do we do with it? Were we really prepared for this? And what do you want to keep about a city when it grows? Seems like a lot of cities up and down the West Coast or on the East Coast have become diluted. You know, the things and the values that were really there have become diluted over time as development kind of bursts forward. So how do we contain the things that are really important? And I can share some of the creative solutions we've come up along with while we're continuing alongside development. So I put up there, the culture of cities is vanishing under the weight of urban migration. And that's not a complaint. You know, I mean, I'm from Portland. I love the change. I love to see the development. I love to see the process. But how do we continue to maintain our culture? So some of the conditions we're under right now are, you know, a lot of job growth. There's a lot of housing that follows that. I believe in continuing to build along our major corridors, increase the use of transit, and you know, definitely protect our urban growth boundary, our mountains, our ocean. And never forget that all the beautiful things we do within creating a building, it's about the people inside them and the experience and community you're creating along the way. So when we build communities, these are the three main things that I'm often thinking about, just to try to, boil it down to a couple of things that's helped our projects be successful. How do you defend and maintain the identity of our city? I've talked about that enough, I think. Affordability, how do you create affordable, healthy, and environmental conscious buildings? And how do you maintain and protect our access to nature? So again, we're talking about the urban growth boundary, energy conservation, so you're not building more dams and things unnecessarily, and just using our transit system that's been put in place and been very successful. So I want to share with you a couple of projects and how we did those things. So this is a new one coming up. This is Sunshine Portland. This is 3 buildings, and we're transforming an industrial site into 75 apartment units. We're putting in 3 bedroom units, and we're adding a really nice softening of the whole industrial site with a lot of landscaping. We're continuing to use our energy conservation model with all the walkways and whatnot, our exterior of the building. We hide that with the screening, and we allow for passive ventilation, so you're not consuming a lot of energy for cooling. And lots of big windows and daylighting and simple things like that. Not driving a lot of cost up, using orientation to help mitigate any excess solar gain. Again, often looking backwards at how someone historically would do something without having to incorporate too much technology and too much cost, you can create a replicable model that works over and over again as long as it's affordable. We feel that affordability and well-built projects will allow them to be widespread. This is the Eco Flats. This is one we did back in 2008. So the interesting thing here, which was first net zero pilot program here in Portland. The interesting thing here too, with all the eco factors of solar, net zero, passive, exterior walkways, it was also 100% occupied in 30 days in 2008 and returned to investors 100%. So, it was a very successful project. It didn't just achieve some of these environmental goals, it also meant something to the financial community. It created a comp that other people have been able to use to get financing on other similar projects. So, tackling lots of problems. Another thing we did here was we engineered this energy monitoring system. So we wanted to use, rather than a lot of gadgets to monitor how energy was being consumed, we created a monitor inside the main lobby that showed everybody else's energy consumption throughout the building. So it created a sense of competition. What do you really accomplish with that is, social pressure maybe. But also I think what you accomplish is somebody might go back upstairs and turn the lights off, because they know they're being watched. It works. You just, engaging this human element in the participation. Again, being from Oregon, we've always been great at recycling. That's why this building absorbed 100%. I think this works in a lot of places in North America, but it also knowing the passions of people that are in the communities and how to give them something that makes sense. This seemed like a real no-brainer. However, it took 2 years to get financed. Inside of it as well, we put the Hopworks bike bar. We do all the Hopworks work, all the design and construction of their work. And again, I just did a trip to Boston where I learned that our liberty of this country was actually born in a beer hall. So again, the idea of community and what can be achieved in community is really important to the buildings. They're not just beautiful structures. I really liked what Josh said about making sure people are always in the images, because it's about the people and how the people are interacting with each other inside of a structure. So a lot of the materials we're using also might create warm environments that'll attract that kind of intimate conversation. Pine Street Market, one we just completed here. This has been, what this was we were able to get this building for really inexpensively in 2013, kind of before the whole market shot off. And the idea, what I became concerned was, we've done a lot of work with the restaurant world, was I knew all these leases would be coming up. And as we came into this new dimension of what is Portland, you see these, leases that were $15 triple net going to $30, $35 triple net. And how were this great culture of restaurants really going to continue? So what we did here is we talked to all these people and we gave them each about 300 square feet. We provided all the common area, all the grease traps, all the hoods, all the bathrooms. So a real small capital expense for them. They could all come here and create a real Portland cultural experience, which was also missing from the Southwest. Most of it was located over on the east side. So we brought them all together, and it's been extremely successful. Not just in Portland, but it's getting attention, worldwide actually now as a food destination, a place to come sample what is Portland. So just bringing together again this community and this culture and giving it a chance. It's not a giant expense. It's not another $1 million restaurant for these guys to try to swallow. Small expense and creating a cultural experience. And that attracted a high-tech company to take over the top 2 floors. That is actually hiring 150 people here locally. So, and they've come from Menlo Park to Portland to hire people. So that's, I think we're starting to see a lot more of that. And within this project as well, we were able to reclaim over 69 columns and beams and reuse them right back into the site. A lot of the materials are reclaimed from the site back into the site. So the tables, the stairways, things like that. Another, always having inspiration with projects has always been something that's really fun. Working with the World of Speed, the owners of this project drove me up to what was a concrete tilt-up and said, we want to make this a mid-century museum. And it was like, oh my God. It's kind of the worst situation to try to transform a concrete tilt-up, but we actually did it. A lot of adding, glass and some really mid-century elements to the exterior and creating a sense of entry and putting these super graphics on the exterior of the building really helped transform it. And this whole thing was really just for them, coming from another era where people could wrench on their own cars and set a world record and, get a baseball cap for having done so. They just wanted to share that experience forward, and we helped put together a program where they could do that. So if you haven't been there, check it out. This was an interesting project we did in New York for the clothing line Now. All of their fabric and everything is corn-based, so it's made to kind of, some of their principles are that it's lasting, it's stylish, but the materials are biodegradable and can go back into the waste stream. So we constructed the entire store out of cardboard and materials that we reclaimed from the waste stream so that the whole experience of the store kind of told that story, because it's not necessarily evident just by looking at the actual clothing. This is the Bridgetown. This is going in up on Fremont now. This is about 50 units and mixed use with ground floor retail. A really beautiful building. And again, using open air walkways, which are contained between the multiple buildings that we're putting on the site. And again, using just passive and the beautiful thing about the exterior walkways, too, is you don't have to light them during the day. You don't have to provide mechanical units for them. And you can get the passive benefit of airflow from the outside through and to a bedroom window on the other side. So you get a full airflow through the building. Cuts down on maintenance costs, cuts down on energy consumption, and it's a nice experience. This is the Lemon Hotel we did down on the North Park blocks, which was just kind of re-energizing that whole area. When we went in here, this is before PNCA had moved down there, and we really wanted to, engage the park in a new way. We put in a really nice office with giant sky snorkels through the roof, and added about 3,000 square feet to the upper floor. And it's become a really nice group of offices. inside. But again, the energy, just trying to create energy on that North Park blocks. So here's some other concepts. You know, this is out by Geldwin. This was our concept we put together for Koi Fusion. They're still working out of a food truck there now, but we're excited about maybe one day. But creating kind of a Times Square experience up along the armature of what we know as Burnside. You know, I mean, if Burnside and the Willamette River are the armature for what is Portland, this could be a really great experience. You have, you know, all the activity at the stadium. You have this kind of, you know, this bar scene up on the upper floor there that would be viewed as people go up and down Burnside. And the whole structure that has all of the signage that would be LED and moving. Inside that is actually an outdoor movie theater that you could watch away games. There's a lot of different options to do that. But just try to create a Portland experience along the major corridor. And we never stop thinking big and like to, you know, think of what's possible. I mean, when you're in San Francisco and you look out at Alcatraz, it looks like Harlem, you know, and they're holding on to it, and because it's generating a tremendous amount of revenue in tourism. But you know, with the housing crisis and whatnot, we thought it would be fun to play with ideas of what you could really do with that. You know, it could be a net zero energy island of housing, and just kind of putting these ideas out there has always been successful for Siteworks to just kind of continue to think big and try things on. So that's my whole presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean-Pierre. I think it's great how you use all the tools that are at your disposal and sort of come up with something really creative and really new. So, yay. I just want to do a little pitch. His website is also pretty awesome, so if you want to go there and look at it, it's very interesting and definitely different than most of the other ones. I enjoyed that. So, Cody, Travers, Josh, Shawn, Matthew, and Jean-Pierre, thank you so much for sharing your talents and your amazing work with us tonight. I thought as artists and as makers, rooted in a firm foundation of theory, I thought that was really enlightening, and I really enjoyed it. And now let's enjoy some food and good conversation and wine and beer and everything you want and have fun. Thank you for being here.